We're really honored tonight to have John Nichols with us from Madison, Wisconsin. You know, at a point in time in history where one person, a lot of people, could make a difference, John Nichols was there not only to document, but to lead. He is probably the finest journalist that we have in America today, and we are so honored and privileged to have him here with us. But just kind of like setting the stage for that, if you all recall, Wisconsin happened at a point in time when there was a Republican sweep of this country, that they had basically taken back control, and they were feeling very empowered and very strong. People in the progressive community weren't feeling very empowered to take a stand. And in fact, I was telling John this over dinner, the labor movement was actually caucusing on how not to use the word labor in order to try to appeal to people. It's really true, and it's very tragic and very sad. But then came Wisconsin, and what happened in Wisconsin, and John will talk about that, but essentially what happened was you had unions who were essentially on their knees begging this right-wing legislator to give in, to give, just let us live, let us live. And there's nothing a bully likes more than a weak opponent. And that's what we had in organized labor, a weak opponent. And so what was counted on there was at the end of the day, and this is what I think we all count on, that union members will say, you guys are really full of it and get the hell out of our union halls. We don't need you, right? We want a union and union leaders who are going to take a stand up for us, do the right thing, speak truth to power, and move the agenda. Well, that wasn't happening across the United States so much. But it happened in Wisconsin. It began in Wisconsin. And then night after night after night, and I don't know if you all saw it, and we were just talking about this too, John Nichols was on television telling the story of Wisconsin. And he told it from the perspective of a working person and a journalist and someone who believes in human dignity and human struggle. And we are so privileged to have John as our friend. I mean, we've counted on him. He's a shot in the arm. He just is, in terms of telling the story. On his book, I would really encourage people to think about the holidays, think about even ahead of time, to think about every gift that they could possibly give to anyone, because the gift of Uprising is the greatest gift we could ever have in America. We should all be rising up. We are rising up. We are rising up, are we not? And fortunately, we've got a beacon there in John Nichols and in the Madison experience that says we can do it, we will do it, and we will continue to do it. So I could go on, but just in terms of passion, compassion, he knows who you are, you know who he is. I really want us to welcome John Nichols.
Thank you. Oh my God. All right. She wrote that pretty much as I had written it for her, which I appreciate. It is ridiculous, of course, to stand in front of largely members of a trade union and tell them, a Democrat, small d Democratic trade union, and tell them that they have the best executive director. What is your title? Tell me.
Everything.
Well, they have the best everything in America. But I happen to believe that you do have the best union leader in America, because she is a representative of a small d Democratic union that puts her in a place to stand with her members, not above them or better than them. She gives you voice. Thank you so much. I have said this before, and I will say it again. I have a good deal of respect for Barack Obama, but my president will always be Roseanne DeMoro. And I'm not kidding. I think that CNA, NNU is literally the most exciting and best thing in the trade union movement in America today. And it is because it is a militant trade union that does exactly what trade unions are supposed to do, and that is not merely to represent their members. Representing your members is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. But if you stop with representation of your members, if that is all that you do, then your members are always vulnerable to the evil and ugly twists and turns of a society that does not always do as you would want it to be. If you want your members to be well represented, you can't just change their working circumstance and then walk away. You have to change society itself so that all workers are respected, so that all workers have the respect that they need, that they have the dignity that they need on the job, and that is what CNA NNU has done. I am so delighted to be with you. I feel as if I have come home. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Wisconsin, which I am wont to do. I am a seventh-generation Wisconsinite. My great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather came to Wisconsin in 1824 to mine lead. Now, the way they mined lead in Wisconsin was that they burrowed into the side of a hill individually. They didn't have those big, deep mines we think of now. They burrowed in individually. Everybody had their own little hole. And you went in that hole alone. And they were Cornish. They made a thing called a pasty. Not what strippers wear. And they made this little, it's a little meat pie. It's like a samosa if you live in the Bay Area. And they would take the samosa, pasty, and they would put it in their shirt at the start of the day. It was hot. And because Wisconsin's cold in the winter, the pasty would keep them warm until lunchtime. Then they would reach in and they would pull it out and eat it while they were still working there in this little hole where you sat alone all day long, chipping away. And what they were chipping away was they were chipping lead out of the side of mountains. And so here you are lying there alone on your back, chipping lead out of the side of a mountain while you're eating. You can understand why members of my family were not smart enough to leave Wisconsin. So we stayed. And I've been rooted in that state ever since and rooted in its working class traditions. And I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you that the Wisconsin struggle was all about the greatness of Wisconsinites, all about the wonder of the people of this state that I have loved and been a part of all my life. But if that was what I came here to tell you today, it'd be a completely irrelevant discussion, right? Because you'd just say, wow, I wish we were like Wisconsin, really cold. And I wish that we could be as special as that place. But the fact of the matter is that the story of Wisconsin, the story of what happened in Wisconsin a year ago this week, a year ago right now, is not a story of one state. It is a story about the great struggle of our time. Understand that every time has its struggle, and they are different struggles. I think they all root back to the same basic challenge. Same basic challenge, very simple one. There's a great mass of people who want their basic needs met. There's a handful of people who want everything and don't want to share with them. It's always this great struggle, but it plays out in so many different ways. Some eras it will be a struggle over slavery. Some eras it will be a struggle over segregation. Some eras it will be a struggle over how we treat immigrants. Some eras it will be a struggle over an illegal and immoral war. Struggle can play out in very different ways. But today, in our time, the struggle is between the lie of austerity and the truth of accountability. The lie of austerity says that there was a cookie jar on the table, and it was full of cookies this morning, but now it's empty. And so everybody in the family has to go hungry. Nobody gets a cookie, right? Because we all have to suffer. We all have to have shared sacrifice. That's the lie of austerity. Because, in fact, there were so many cookies in that jar, you couldn't possibly have eaten them all. Somebody took the cookies. Somebody's got the cookies. And if we have shared sacrifice, that means I don't ask for my cookie. But if we have the truth of accountability, I'm going to start rooting around this household until I find the cookies. And the fact of the matter is, there's a group of billionaires and CEOs that took the cookies, and I don't want to share sacrifice. I want to get my cookies back. That's what Wisconsin was about. It was about cookies. And the fact of the matter is, all that happened in Wisconsin was that a whole bunch of people decided at the same time to say, I want my cookies back. I don't want to share sacrifice with a bunch of billionaires who aren't going to share anything at all with me. And the best way to understand what happened in Wisconsin was that we didn't notice for the first month of Governor Scott Walker's tenure as chief executive of the state. We didn't notice. Oh, we complained, we whined a little bit, because the first thing he did was cut taxes for out-of-state corporations. Then he cut taxes for billionaires. Then he cut estate taxes. And then he did the wonderful tort law reform, which means that if you're a poor person and some corporation destroys your life, you can't go to them and demand anything in return. This is what he did in the first month as governor of Wisconsin. You know, each of these things costs money. You know, when they tax the rich, that brings wealth into our common treasury. We're able to do things with it. When they cut taxes for the rich, that takes wealth out of the treasury, right? There's less revenue coming in. So the first month, tax cut, all these changes to regulations, all these good things for corporations and CEOs. And then in the second month of his tenure, in February of 2011, Governor Walker announces that we have a financial problem. We have a fiscal crisis. It's quite ironic. They did $144 million worth of tax cuts for the wealthy, and then in the second month they announced we had a $137 million budget shortfall. Now, I'm not good with math, but it seemed to me that was an easy thing to sort out, right? I mean, that we could find that money. We could find those cookies. But the governor said, oh, no, it's a fiscal crisis. It's a little subtlety here. Make a note of Mr. Adelson, will you make a note of this, sir? There's never been a fiscal crisis, ever. There is no such thing as a fiscal crisis. There's not a fiscal crisis today in Greece. There is a moral crisis. There's a moral crisis where people in government who are so owned by a handful of elites will say that we can't balance our budget because we have taken certain options off the table, like accountability, like taxing the rich, like a fair economic. That's off the table. The only way we can balance a budget is to make the poorest of the poor homeless, push them out of their home, make them truly suffer, and then move everybody back down that ladder closer to homelessness. So that at the end of the day, nobody's better off except the very wealthy folks. This is what our governor said. And fiscal crisis is never about budget. It's never about money. Fiscal crisis is always an excuse to do the things you could never do in any other circumstance. And what Governor Walker wanted to do is what Governor Corbett in Pennsylvania wanted to do, Governor Kasich in Ohio wanted to do, Governor Schneider in Michigan wanted to do, Governor, got to think of my Florida guy, Rick Scott wanted to do. I can't quite, kind of, my head, I have a hard time wrapping around somebody who's been actively involved in Medicare fraud would be the governor of a state. But what all these guys, these ladies are saying, yeah, he did do that. So what they all wanted to do, what all of these governors wanted to do in some way or not, was to disempower those political forces that might challenge them in the future. And so the fiscal crisis in Wisconsin required a quote-unquote budget repair bill. Well, that's just, it's like the same kind of things. They do it out in Washington all the time. We have a budget crisis, and the whole media covers for 3 weeks how Congress fighting with the president and how they're going to do like this little extension and amendment on the budget. Well, that's what a budget repair bill is in Wisconsin. A friend of mine is a state legislator up there. Is a guy named Fred Risser. He's 84 years old. Fred Risser was elected to the state legislature when Dwight Eisenhower was president of the United States. He's been there since 1956. I said to Fred, how do you usually deal with a budget repair issue? And he says, well, that's like moving moving some spare change. It's like at home, if you say, oh, we got a little bit bigger water bill, you take some money over, you pay. It's easy. It's nothing. We've dealt with it hundreds of times. Sometimes we didn't even write. A lot of times over years, we just do budget repair on the back of an envelope. Just to make a little agreement you're done with. Scott Walker's back of the envelope was 111 pages long. It wasn't a budget repair bill. It was a change everything in Wisconsin bill, using the budget, the fiscal crisis, as a fantasy to get you across the line. What he proposed was to strip public sector unions of their collective bargaining rights. And you think, well, that sounds pretty bad. But that's just the start of it. He also proposed to say that your pensions, you got to pay more, your benefits, you got to pay more, you got a cap on your salaries no matter what sector you're working in, and just for a little extra help, your union can no longer collect dues. You can't do the dues checkoff the way that you have in Wisconsin, the first state in the country to have collective bargaining for public employees since 1959. You can't do that anymore. That's gone. But then, just to make it more interesting, your union ceases to be at the end of every year. You have to reconstitute your union every year. And I'm not sure that people can fully wrap their head around it. So let me do it on the flip. Let's flip it around. Let's say that if we said to corporations, you cease to be at the end of every year. You have to reconstitute yourself at the end of every year. Now, here's an interesting concept. Let's say we said that to McDonald's. So on December 31st at, late in the evening, all these folks go out to every McDonald's in America. There's tens of thousands of them, and they lock the door of McDonald's. And McDonald's Corporation says the next morning, well, can you give me the keys? They say, no. You have ceased to be. All of your restaurants are no longer yours. They don't exist anymore. You have to reconstitute yourself this morning. So good luck. Go find some French fries. And that's what they're saying to the unions. You don't exist anymore. And if you want to exist next year, you got to go organize yourselves again. We understand the dynamic there. What they have done to the unions is not to impose shared sacrifice. It's not to put a pressure on them or something like that. It is to put them in a situation where they could never again be an effective force in the workplace or in the politics of the state. You think, well, how did Scott Walker come up with such a brilliant idea? It wasn't his idea. The American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which is a group, if you don't know about it, you should, because someday it's going to haunt your ass. ALEC is a group formed 40 years ago by a bunch of corporations, and it's like we have such a wonderful thing to be in a room with predominantly women. I think you'll understand this concept. Ladies' night. Ladies' night at a bar. That's how ALEC works, right? Because at ladies' night at a bar, the guys pay $5 to get in, but the ladies get in free. Because the guys want to meet the ladies. Well, in ALEC, the corporations pay $30,000 fee to get in, and the legislators get in for $50. Well, why? Because the corporations want to meet the ladies. And the corporations want to give them a whole bunch of ideas about how they might legislate. And all these things that Walker did are part of a national template. Everything that happened in Wisconsin was part of a national plan for how you disempower unions and how you restructure our small d democratic life in America so the power doesn't rest with people anymore. So the power, amazingly enough, Citizens United, all this corporate money, that wasn't enough. They want to make sure that nobody else is in the game so that elections themselves no longer matter. Now, you would think that this should upset anybody, any place. why did it upset Wisconsinites so much? What happened? Well, let me tell you first off that I know Wisconsin pretty well. And on the night that Walker's plan came down, I was sitting with some prominent Democratic legislators and union leaders. And I said, what are we going to do about this? And the union leaders were like, I don't know. And then the Democratic legislators were like, well, if you don't know, I don't know. And then I started, and you can't make this stuff up. I swear this is absolutely true, that a prominent Democratic legislator said, well, Walker's going to win. I mean, he's going to get what he wants. He's Democratic governor with control, or Republican governor with control of the legislature, all Republican control. I mean, he's going to get what he wants, so we have no ability to stop him. Maybe we could get some concessions from him on civil unions. I'm not kidding. They're like, because I guess the theory was he's going to take away the rights of unions, and so civil unions have the word union in the name, and so maybe we can do something. And they were actually already thinking of the compromises and deals that they would make. And these are not evil people. Maybe inept, but not evil. And so they were all talking about this, and I could feel it. I could feel defeat in the air. Look at that. There's a woman sitting back there going, they're going to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Right? What are you saying?
I have been waiting to see a union other than ours for at least 4 decades.
Well, keep waiting. Can you hold your breath? All right. Yeah. All right. So let me tell you what, because so that's exactly, I'm sitting there feeling the same way, right? I'm raised in the UAW hall in Kenosha. I think the union will come to the rescue, but no. And so I'm thinking, what is going to happen? How are we going to do this thing? I was a little bit scared, to say the least. And then something odd happened, because, of course, everybody in powerful positions, all these legislators, a lot of union leaders, they were clueless. Not bad, not evil, but just not ready to deal with this thing. And they were basically already looking for the compromises. But somebody forgot to send a memo to the graduate students at the University of Wisconsin. And the Teaching Assistants Association, which does not exactly have the ring of the most powerful union in the history of the Republic, the Teaching Assistants Association sent a memo out saying, this is it, guys. Everything is at stake. We are teaching assistants, which is not maybe the biggest thing in the world, but if they take away all the rights of public sector unions, we teach at the University of Wisconsin. It's a public university. We're screwed. So we have to go out and fight. And the next morning, 50 teaching assistants came out in front of the University of Wisconsin Memorial Union, some of their allies, with handmade signs that said, this will not pass. And that was the beginning of resistance. Resistance, as the French say. So 50 of them stood out there and they said, this isn't so bad, resisting power. Maybe we should do a march on the Capitol on Monday morning. Well, this is a radical notion here. It's like, we're not just going to have one rally and go home and never do anything else. Hadn't thought of that. That's a novel concept. And so on Monday, I swear this is where it started. They all cut out little hearts, little red hearts. And they wrote on them, Governor Walker, don't break our hearts. And they marched to the Capitol with little cutout hearts and red balloons. 1,000 people this time, 1,000, mostly students. They get to the Capitol, and they're out in front of the Capitol. And Peter Rickman, who is the young student who was one of the leaders of the union, who's out there. And they got to the Capitol, and of course, usually how a march goes, so many of the movements we're involved in, you get there, and then you're like, wow, we made it to the Capitol. That's cool. All right, let's go home and see if we're on TV. And, but no. Peter Rickman, there's a video of him. This is an incredible thing. He's with the bullhorn. He says, come on, let's go in the Capitol. Which is a good idea, because power, those marble walls make it very easy not to pay attention to a demonstration outside the Capitol. And so they push the doors open, and they marched in, and they went to the governor's office, and they crowded into a narrow hallway, and the TV cameras were on them, and suddenly everybody's saying, oh my gosh, something is happening. The people are revolting. And I don't mean revolting, I mean revolting. And so here's this crowd, and everybody's like, well, hold it. I mean, nobody got arrested. We were able to assemble and petition for the redress of grievances. What is this, America? And suddenly, people started to think, hold it, I do believe we do have a right to assemble and petition for the redress of grievances, and that right was put in the Constitution, not, just for fun, but when government does totalitarian and evil things like destroy unions and take away collective bargaining rights. And so, people decided to have more rallies. And they started to keep marching on the Capitol and keep going into the Capitol. And that afternoon, that Monday afternoon, I had been invited to speak at a union organized by the public school or at an event organized by the public school teachers in Madison. Madison Teachers Incorporated, which is, I would go so far as to say it is the CNA NNU of the teaching game. They are a tough bunch of teachers. Now, admittedly, they're not like really crazy-ass kooky like some of the librarians I've met. But they are, no, I swear, this is a slight deviation. I promise it's getting better here. But so I swear, Governor Walker says that he's going to do all this evil stuff. And he actually had more respect for the trade union movement than a lot of the union movement people. Because he said, if things got out of control, I'm calling out the National Guard. Right? He said that right up front, which is, of course, intimidation meant to scare people away. And there's a lot of people really scared that the National Guard was going to come out and, clear the streets, do all sorts of crazy stuff. And there's a tension all the time, and there's all these rumors that the Guard is mobilizing at this place down the street and all that. And so the first few days, it was very tense. Until one day, I swear, there's a big crowd out there, and this girl comes, she's like maybe 21, 22, and about this tall, and she kind of comes bouncing across the street, and it's really cold. And so she's got like her winter coat on, but she had pulled a white T-shirt over her winter clothes, and she had scrawled on it with a Sharpie, "I am a librarian, and I am not afraid of the National Guard." And I thought, that's okay, man. So, admittedly, librarians are the starting point for all radical politics, but then you move up into some of the other things. The teachers are out on this afternoon, and they're having a rally, and so I get asked occasionally to speak at rallies. It's like, no politician will come, no celebrity, nobody interesting. So they say, well, that guy will come. And so I get invited to come, and they want me to give a little speech there. And so that's cool, and I'm for unions. And so I get out there, but I got to pick my kid up after school, right? So I pick her up at school, and I say, Whitman, we're going to a rally, and then we're going to Noodles. Because if any parents in the room know that children only eat at Noodles. And there's a mom back there going, yes, that is true. And so she said, she's cool. She grew up with me and her mom. And so she knows that union rallies are, 15 minutes. And, it's kind of sad. And then we go home. And so we get up there to the Capitol. But there's 8,000 people out there. And it's not like sad and we go home. This is like a big whomping bunch of folks. And I'm like, we may not get to Noodles till a little bit later. And I'm thinking, where did all these people come from? I mean, what is going on here? Why is my trade union movement so easily beaten down and ready to surrender, seeming to flex muscles and show energy? And I get up there and I'm about to speak. And I got the answer in the way that it always comes. It doesn't come from, like some pollster. Doesn't come from a message group, right? You want to find out when people really are mobilizing, when something real is happening, you look around at the people who've come there. And you look at them and you look at what they're saying. And there's this guy, and he's a heavy-set guy, standing up there right outside the Capitol, and he had a sign in Arabic. And, I have covered wars in the Middle East. I've covered the Intifada. I've covered the first Gulf War. And so I'm feeling a little bit cool. I walk up to him and I say, Assalamu alaikum. And he looks at me and he says, I don't speak Arabic. I said, you can understand my confusion, the sign. And he goes, oh, that. Yeah. I went online today with the Google, and I used that translator thing. And I said, well, what does your sign say? And he says, if Egypt can get rid of Mubarak, Wisconsin can get rid of Scott Walker. And suddenly I realized something. This was middle of February 2011. We had just spent a month watching people who we're taught to look down on. Americans are taught to think, nobody else knows how to exercise freedom like we do. You know, and so we had spent a month watching Egyptians courageously go to Tahrir Square to challenge military power that had the intent of killing them if need be, and to go there again and again and again until the dictator, supported by U.S. imperial power, at the rate of billions of dollars every year, stepped down and gave control of the country, at least to the military, and maybe a little bit to the people. And Wisconsinites had seen that. It had been a painful experience. They had had to watch Anderson Cooper on a nightly basis in the white T-shirt. And I swear, one night I'm watching the Egypt thing, I almost gave up. Anderson Cooper, he's reading a poem, it's like they came each night to the square. And I'm thinking, this is one of the most nightmarish things I have ever seen, but yet it's so courageous, we're going to stick with him. And so they had seen this for a month. We had all watched it. This woman is laughing. She is busting a gut because she knows I am right. We spent a month watching Anderson Cooper read tone poems about Egyptian resistance. And so Wisconsinites had watched that too. So true, admittedly, so had Scott Walker. And it is said in Wisconsin that Scott Walker looked around the world on the morning of February 11th, saw that the planet was one dictator short, and thought, I can fill the void. And did what they always do, which is they go after labor rights, first thing you do. But Wisconsinites actually got that, and that's a very big deal. I sometimes joke about this. The truth is there were a number of unions that did anticipate this to some extent. They really did walk around with their jaws dropped when he actually went to it. But there were unions that were at least ready to do something. But they would never have gotten the kind of mobilization they did if there hadn't been something in the popular imagination that caused people to make the leap out of the traditional narrow ways in which we respond to crisis, to oppression, to assaults on our basic liberties, and said, okay, there's another way to do this. And the truth of the matter is Egypt was real. Egypt was something that was very much present in people's minds. Walker moved literally in those days after Egypt, and Wisconsinites got it in a way it's an intangible, it's something the national media can never understand, it's something political strategists can never understand. It is something that the pollsters for the AFL-CIO and the focus groups for the AFL-CIO are never going to put in the mix. But it was real to people. I knew it because, that first rally, 50, then Monday, 1,000, later 8,000. By Wednesday, 20,000. By Thursday, 40,000. By Friday, 50,000 people filling the square around the Capitol, and as many as 8,000 people inside the Capitol occupying the building day after day, sleeping in the Capitol through the nights. The road crews from Rock County, Wisconsin, working class, blue-collar fellas who plow snow in the winter and frankly have the body type that comes from having sat in a snowplow with a lot of donuts. Not exactly the perfect physical specimens. They came up from Rock County and they arrayed themselves on the steps and the marble floors of the Capitol, and they slept, some of them, for 18 nights, refusing to leave that Capitol. Some of them arrayed around the statue of Robert M. La Follette, the great progressive leader of Wisconsin, the man who had said democracy is a life, the man who had organized working-class Wisconsinites a century ago, trade unionists and farmers to fight against corporate power and the trusts of his day. And the Rock County road crews arrayed around there, and they slept around that statue. And one of them, Marvick, said to me, we're sleeping here because if the National Guard does come and they clear the Capitol, there's going to be one group of us who stand with Robert M. La Follette and the Wisconsin tradition, and they're going to have to drag us out, and they won't get us out of this Capitol unless they dislodge that statue, because he's still our governor. Scott Walker's not our governor. And these people came there with such courage and such energy. These crowds became so large. One day I'm walking there. It's the first Friday of the struggle. We're walking around the Capitol. And, this is an interesting thing about when you come to the square every day, you don't actually know what to do. Because, when you come to one rally, that's cool. Okay, we rally, we go home. But if you're coming every day, you start to just walk around a lot. And you pick it, you go in circles. So one day, Jesse Jackson had come to town, and we're walking around the square. There's about 20,000 people just walking around, marching around the Capitol, chanting. And there's this one guy, and this is where I knew the Egypt thing was real. There's this one guy. As much as I do respect the Blame Wall Street posters that were brought to our great state. The truth of the matter is, you want to understand a movement, it's not on a printed poster. It's not even on a poster that you get from Kinko's, the white one that you take your Sharpie out and you write a slogan on it. Now, you want to understand a movement, it's on a box that somebody tore apart, right? And then wrote a slogan on it with a pen that they had to keep going over and over to make the letters visible. I mean, that's real. And so we're walking around the square, all these people, and there's a guy with his box out there, which he'd written on, and it said on his poster, "I thought Cairo would be warmer." People got this thing, and they got it to such a fundamental point that something amazing happened, something I have rarely seen. In fact, frankly, I've covered politics for the better part of 30 years, but something I've never actually seen in my life, and that is that Democrats became Democrats. And I'm not kidding. This is it. On the first Thursday of the struggle, the day that the governor had said they would pass this bill, that this bill would become the law, the unions would lose their basic rights, that effectively we would disembowel public sector unionism in Wisconsin and begin a process that would ultimately sweep across not just Wisconsin, but states across the country. Remember, as Walker was moving, the governors of Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania and other states were taking elements of this and moving it across the country. Paul Ryan was talking in Washington about we're going to get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Barack Obama was saying, well, it's not such a crazy idea. And so suddenly we had this thing where the whole country seemed to be moving in this right-wing direction. And it was so presumed that it would be passed immediately. And then on that first Thursday, the day that the state Senate of Wisconsin was supposed to move, the Democratic state senators, the interesting thing is, here's a little tip for you. Take it, use it however you want. You look at the back people for office, back movement people, right? Back somebody who actually comes out of what you're a part of. Happens that the minority leader of the state Senate was a guy named Mark Miller. And Mark Miller is this rock-solid former military pilot, but he's a flat-out radical. And Mark Miller, his mom was the woman who organized Eugene McCarthy's campaign against Lyndon Johnson. And then she went out and organized the National Women's Political Caucus, and she's just flat-out coolest person I knew, Midge Miller. This was her son. And Mark is running state Senate, and, it's supposed to be a loser job, right? They're in the majority, you don't have any power, you're just supposed to kind of, go along. You're supposed to be a cog in the machine. Well, Mark Miller said, isn't there anything we can do? Because there's, a lot of angry people out there, and they look an awfully lot like our constituents. And so he's going through, and this is actually Mark himself, he's going through the rules of the Senate, and he sees this phrase, fiscal quorum. And he said to an aide, what is a fiscal quorum? And the aide said, well, when you're doing budget bills, you got to have a certain number of members there. If you don't, you can't pass things dealing with economic issues. He said, well, this is a budget repair bill. Is a fiscal quorum required? Yeah, it is. He says, well, how many members would have to be missing for this thing to not go forward? And they calculated a little bit. They said 14 members. So, well, the Democratic caucus says 14 members. If we all leave, governor can't move his bill forward. And now this is an incredible concept, right? 14 Democrats actually acting in unity with one another and in solidarity with the trade union movement. Now, I don't know about your California Democrats, but our Wisconsin Democrats, that is not a normal activity. There you go. And so Mark Miller invites them all into a room on this first Thursday, the day they're supposed to pass the bill, and he says to the 14 Democrats, many of whom are pretty imperfect human beings, he says, look, guys and gals, we've got 40, 50,000 people outside here saying we shouldn't pass this bill. And we've never, ever seen this in the history of the state before. Nothing like this has ever happened. Nothing like this has happened in America in a very, very long time. We've got 5, 6, 7,000 people sleeping here in the Capitol demanding that we don't do this bill. And we have the power to stop it, or at least slow it down, if we all leave right now. He says, I've got vans waiting outside. By the law of Wisconsin, if we are not here, and if we are outside the boundaries of the state, so the state patrol cannot come and arrest us and force us to come to the legislature, because that's the law of the state, if you're in the state. It says if we leave Wisconsin, all 14 of us, if we leave, we can slow this thing down. We can at least stop it for this moment, this day. Are you in? And amazingly enough, all 14 Democrats filed out of the Capitol, got in the vans, and made the ultimate sacrifice for a Wisconsinite, which is they headed to Illinois. And no, I'm not going there, brother. It's a family audience. There's children in the room, all right? But there's a phrase in Wisconsin for Illinoisans that the first word and the third word, the middle word is Illinois, and the F word and the B word are different. And so bottom line is they go to Illinois where they check into the fabulous La Quinta Inn in the parking lot of Great America by Gurnee, Illinois. And they stay there for 18 days. Now, this is an incredible thing. Because during that time that they were away, the governor could not move his agenda. And they did, in their leaving, they did the only useful thing that a politician can ever do, which is to get out of the way of the people, right? And during those 18 days that they were gone, more and more people kept coming to the Capitol. The crowds kept growing. I went to a bar mitzvah on the first Saturday of the struggle, and the bar mitzvah was all about the struggle. And it got done, and I thought, well, I'm going to stop by the Capitol. There's not a big rally organized. I want to see if the movement's still going on. I get up to the Capitol. There's 100,000 people there. I mean, you look down every street, and there was masses of people. They had come from across Wisconsin, driven into the Capitol to be a part of this struggle. And then I thought, well, this can never get better than this. And then I come down on the next day on Sunday, and there's tens of thousands of people out. And I think, well, that's the end of it. Monday, it's over. Everybody's going to go back to work. But no, the Madison teachers decided that they had to have an in-service day, that they weren't going to teach that day. They're going to the Capitol. And it's actually a couple days before they'd done it, but they kept maintaining this thing. And it's an incredible thing. The teachers from Madison decided they're going to walk out. And then the teachers from schools throughout the region started walking out. And I thought to myself, that's an incredible thing. And I want to go see this. So I'm driving up to the Capitol to see this walkout. You see all these teachers up there. And as I'm driving to my Capitol, I'm not moving as fast as I anticipate. Because, Madison's not that big a city. And, you usually can just zing right up to the Capitol. And here on my main drag going to the Capitol, I'm moving slowly. What is the problem with my transit here? And as I got a little closer, I saw there were police lights flashing. And I thought, well, that's an incredible thing. There's some police. I wonder what could it be? And as I got closer, I realized what it was. The teachers did walk out. And using Twitter and Facebook, 2,000 students at East High School in Madison had gathered in the parking lot of the school at 8 a.m. and were marching the 3 miles from the school to the Capitol to stand in solidarity with their teachers. Because when somebody walks out and takes that risk, somebody else does it as well. It's not that young people are turned off to politics. It's not that young people are turned off to movements. They just haven't seen a movement that mattered. And when they see a movement that matters, they want to be a part of it. Because they're idealistic in the way that you should be. But you're not idealistic foolishly. You want to see a movement there. So you want to join something. And those students came, and I got to the Capitol, and I thought, I've just seen one of the most incredible sights of my life, until I got to the Capitol, and I saw 2,000 students from West High School in Madison who had marched 4 miles from their school into the Capitol. And then a few minutes later, 6,000 University of Wisconsin students marched into the square in red and white, the colors of our state, chanting solidarity. And suddenly I realized something beyond my comprehension was happening right in front of my eyes. And that is the point. That is the point at which I decided I'm not leaving Wisconsin until this thing gets done, because I know I cover national politics for a living, but I know that there is nothing that Barack Obama or John Boehner or Mitch McConnell or Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi is going to do that's going to matter as much as what these young people and these teachers are doing right here in Madison, Wisconsin. This was a movement that was taken on. And I go through every detail of it. I can tell you so many stories. Wisconsinites have become obsessive. On the last Friday, or 2 Fridays ago, right before the anniversary of the start of the struggle, we had a party over at my house, and somebody had their computer open. We started looking at videos of the protests. And suddenly everybody just spent the whole night looking at the videos we were like nostalgic. And then I realized it happened all over the state. We were so nostalgic that 2 weeks ago Saturday, we went out and had another mass rally at the Capitol. And this is the interesting thing about what happened. I want to emphasize, because we're with a good union audience, and I know often how frustrating it can be to talk about building movements and doing things. This union, which does a better job than any union I know of, literally, and I don't say that because I'm with you, although I do happen to be with you, but this union has been so absolutely incredible. But when you give people a chance to fight back, and I mean really fight back, and it's the truth of the matter, some of the unions in Wisconsin, they thought they could kind of bargain their way out, kind of game their way out of this thing. So they announced early on, they said, it's not about the money. We are willing to sacrifice. We're willing to take the pay cuts. We're willing to take the benefit cuts. We're willing to take the pension cuts. We're willing to give you everything, because they said, Ben, it's not about money, and Governor Walker, just let us keep our collective bargaining rights. We won't bargain, we promise. But, let us at least, have it on paper. And it was a really ugly, tough situation. It was frustrating. And yet people were sort of saying, well, I guess this is the only option we have. It's an age of austerity. And interestingly enough, I know, Duo's hands up here going, this is so sad. But it wasn't so sad, because there's like a hero. There's a cavalry trust me, there's a cavalry that rides in. It's really cool. It's just like the movies. Suddenly, down by the University of Wisconsin, about a week or so into the struggle, there's a rally by the university. And then people march from the university up to the Capitol. And they've got all these signs that are new signs that hadn't been seen in the struggle up to that point. And the sign said, no concessions. Blame Wall Street. And then down at the bottom of the signs, it said National Nurses United. And suddenly the whole struggle took this wild turn as people suddenly realized, no, we don't have to bargain from on our knees. We can stand up as human beings and look our oppressors in the eye and say, no way, we do not bargain away our collective bargaining rights, nor do we bargain away our pay, our benefits, and our pensions. It was a transformational moment in Wisconsin when National Nurses United showed up. It changed the nature of the struggle, and it gave people the energy to carry forward. You have no idea how absolutely vital to this process you folks were. And I want to tell you that once it became a fight, when it became absolutely clear that this was a fight, that's when it got exciting. That's when it got amazing. And I brought something along. This is, got all my junk in my pocket there. Here, this is Tom Morello. He's the lead guitarist from Rage Against the Machine, as well as Audio Slave, which I know a lot of you folks listen to on a regular basis. And, but they're really a very popular band. And this is Tom's new album. It's called Worldwide Rebel Songs. And it's got a song, the last song on it, called Uniontown. And Tom came in to Madison right around the same time National Nurses United. I don't know if you coordinated your out-of-state agitation. But Tom came into Madison, And he did this rally outside the Capitol, and there's, it's a typical thing, around 50,000 people. And it was so cold that day that Tom could barely play his guitar, and he had brought a bunch of his other friends. In fact, it had been snowing, so he couldn't actually get. Tom's a very wealthy, very successful musician, but he couldn't get to Madison. The plane didn't come, so he only got to Chicago. So he called up a bunch of his punk rock friends, and they got in the back of a van and kind of like stormed it through to Madison. And they get up there in front of the Capitol, and they were played. If you go, I really recommend Googling it. Tom Morello, and then the song "This Land Is Your Land." The old Woody Guthrie song. They're doing it in front of the Capitol, and it's sort of this amazing image because there's 50,000 people, and he's playing as best he can with his frozen fingers, and all these people, whether they're young people or people in their 80s, are all jumping up and down. This land is your land. And everybody's thinking, wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, sort of a punk rock pogo version of This Land Is Your Land. But actually, it was 20 degrees and wind chill of 5, and they were jumping up and down to keep warm. But it was still a very powerful moment. And Tom was so inspired that he said, hey, we're going to do a concert tonight over at the convention center. And there was no time to announce it. There was, they didn't put posters up. They didn't talk about it on the radio or anything like that. They just used the Twitter and the Facebook and stuff. And they said, so Tom Morello and a bunch of other bands, the Street Dogs and other folks, are going to be down in the basement of the convention center. It was so cold. It was so awful. And nobody who was occupying the Capitol could come. Because if they left the Capitol, there was this assumption that, we're not, we may not be rocket scientists, but if you leave an occupied space, there's a chance that people that don't want you there might lock it. And so it had to be other people. It had to, build out this thing. So I thought, well, I'll go check this out. I go over there. And it's freezing cold and snowing and everything like that. And there's a line coming out of the convention center up the street. I get in there, there's like 5,000 high school and college students. And I thought, well, they just came to see Tom Morello. And then the Street Dogs from Boston. They used to be the band called the Dropkick Murphys. And this guy, the guy's the leader. His name is Mike McColgan. He was a big rock star in the 1990s. And then he quit being a rock star so that he could be a Boston firefighter because his family had always been firefighters, and he joined the union. And then through time, he decided, well, no, it's as much as I love running into burning buildings, it's cooler to be a rock star. And so he went back to having a band, and he started this band called the Street Dogs, and they're very pro-labor. And so he comes out on stage. There's 5,000 young people. And I tell you this story because it's really why you're in this game. It's how do we build out movements? How do we get people engaged who aren't members of the union, who maybe don't even come from union households? So Mike McColgan comes out, and he goes, we come from Boston, Massachusetts, and we don't take this from anybody, especially assholes like Scott Walker, using that rock and roll language we've come to love. And then he says, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of taking concessions, and I'm sick and tired of compromising. And he says, I think it's time we fight. And there's this roar that comes from all these young people, many of them not from union households. And then he says, we got a little song we wrote called Up the Union. And he says, when I hit that chorus, I want you to put your fist in the air and yell, Up the Union. And damned if they didn't. In fact, here I was in a basement of a convention center in Madison, Wisconsin, in the middle of winter, 2011, when unions are supposed to mean nothing to anybody, and it's all supposed to be over, and we're supposed to be beaten down, and it's an age of austerity and all that. And suddenly, the band kicks in. I actually start the book with some of this. The band kicks in, and Mike McColgan he puts his microphone down, and he walks out into the crowd on the shoulders of kids, holding his fist in the air, and he is surrounded by 5,000 people with their fists in the air chanting Up the Union. And I'm thinking to myself, this is it, right? I mean, if I've got thousands of young people who are absolutely ready to fight with everything they've got for a future for trade unions, I'd say, ma'am, is that the moment we've been waiting for? You're waiting 40 years? Okay. And so it struck me, this is a pretty darn good thing. And he said, you guys actually, Californians come into this story in a very interesting way. They had a video, and they said, it was on Bill O'Reilly's show, and it said, union violence in Wisconsin. And it was, the Wisconsin movement was an entirely nonviolent movement. There were not arrests. there was a unwillingness to depart spaces that people didn't want you in, but there were so many people. It's an interesting thing about arrests. You put enough people in a place, it's very hard to arrest them all. And so, but it's a very, very peaceful movement. And so I'm like, wow, union violence in Wisconsin, that's amazing. So Bill O'Reilly's talking about how these terrible trade unions, they're all out there and it's very ugly and all the nasty, awful situation. And then the camera shot pulls back. And, there are some union guys, kind of pushing somebody around. And so camera shot pulls back. And there are palm trees. Now, I realize you're Californians, you don't know this, but the palm tree is not native to Wisconsin. Turned out it was video from a California union dispute. And no, but there's a National Nurses United component to this story because the next day, the National Nurses United organizers who had been sent in with the Blame Wall Street signs went to a party store and bought all of the inflatable green palm trees and then brought them out for the demonstrations. And for the rest of the movement, every time there was a rally, there were palm trees waving in Wisconsin, paid for by your union dues. And I would say that is some of the best spent money I have ever seen. And when you got to see, I can't emphasize to you, when Michael Moore came to Wisconsin, and he came to give his big speech, and it was a fabulous speech about corporate power and economics, and it basically read like an NNU talking points. And you got them in your pocket, don't you? And but he's got the facts. So Michael Moore comes out. He's standing in front of like 50,000 people, and he's looking out at the crowd, and he was just like giggling. He's like, this is like the coolest thing I ever saw. And then he looks out and he sees the palm trees waving, and he just busted up laughing. He's literally bending over, and he says, "This is too cool, palm trees." And so Fox did not acquit itself perfectly, I'll admit. But I don't want to bang on Fox. I want to bang on the rest of the media. And there were some good, I want to say there are some good players. Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Was out there the very first day doing fantastic coverage. She's a real hero. Ed Schultz from MSNBC broadcast every day and actually came out and physically broadcast live from Madison 3 days. That was really good. Tom Hartman, if you listen to him on the radio, Tom Hartman covered it every single day. So there's some people in media who really did the job and made the commitment. But most of the media, they did it the way that media covers labor struggles, which is the only reason that media these days is ever interested in labor is if it gets in the way of rich people, right? Like and I would recommend this, if you want to get some coverage, go get in the way of Paris Hilton, right? And because that's interesting. If poor people or working people get in the way of rich people, that's a story. Otherwise, they can go do whatever they want. Nobody really cares. And the only place where they really don't care even more if it's out in the middle of the country. And, because most of the major media in America covers America pretty much like they do Africa. It's kind of it's this distant place. You don't really know much about it. Do we have to learn the names of the capitals? And it's sort of like, can't we just fly over it from Washington to LA? Do we have to actually go there? But the pictures from Madison were so amazing. All these, hundreds of thousands of people. And it wasn't just Madison, it was towns all over Wisconsin. So the New York Times decided, all right, we have to send some reporters out to Wisconsin. So they did it the way they do. They got some flak jackets and stuff, and they got their khakis, and then they got their, they got their topographical maps in case there are hills and things, and they got their phrase books, and they parachuted in to Wisconsin. And they got to the Capitol in Madison, and they looked around, and they said, wow, there's 100,000 people out here, the largest mobilization of trade unionists in the modern history of the United States. They've occupied the Capitol. They're pushing back. Now NNU has come in saying no concessions, blame Wall Street. They're talking about a real challenge to the austerity agenda of the political class. No story here. And so they got in the car, the New York Times, I'm not making this up, they go 40 miles south of Madison to a town called Janesville, searching for the mythological private sector worker who does not like public sector workers. And they got to find somebody who's upset that the lazy, awful public sector workers are complaining about cuts in their pay. Because you understand the role of the media in America is to remind people that somebody else might have something better than they do, so they'll get upset about it. And so they get down to Janesville, and they go to a tavern, which of course, midday, that's where you'd find a worker. And they walk in, they pull out the phrase book, and they go, "Hello, worker. You are upset by, you do not like what's happening in Madison." And of course, because it's foreign to them, so they talk louder. Union's bad, right? And the guy goes, "Yeah, union's bad." And they go, "You don't like it when public sector workers ride their yachts across the lake to pick up their checks." And no, I do not. And so they find this guy in the bar, and he says, I was a UAW member, and I worked at the big factory. The factory is closed, and yet these public sector workers, they still get big pay, and they get pensions, and they get benefits, and it's my tax money, and why I don't have good stuff, so why should anybody else have good stuff? Because it's the American way. Nobody suffers alone. And so, I want them to suffer too. And so the New York Times loves this story. Right on the front page, private sector workers do not approve of public sector, protests in Madison. I thought to myself, damn, this is really sad, because I was all excited about this. I thought something big was happening here. NNU had showed up with posters. And then I would have been bummed out until like a week later. I would get my New York Times, and I'm reading through it, and I'm on page 2 down by the hemorrhoid ads. And there's a correction down there on page 2, and it says, "About that story from Janesville, Wisconsin. It turns out that the guy we interviewed didn't work at the auto plant that closed down. We didn't check the records before we published the story, but we have since. And then it also turns out that he didn't work at any other unionized plant in town. And when we contacted the UAW, they had no record of him ever having been a member. In fact, it kind of sounds like he pretty much made up the story, and there was no story there." And I thought to myself, how could the New York Times, we all make mistakes. How could the New York Times have gotten this story right? What could they have done to get the story right? I scratched my head. I was struggling. Then I thought, hold it, I've got a notion. They could have stayed at the Capitol in Madison, where every single day of the struggle, hundreds of members of United Auto Workers Local 95 from Janesville, Wisconsin, were marching with their banners in solidarity with the public sector workers. They could have seen the story right there, but no, they were so polluted in their thinking that they had to go out and find something to meet their stereotype, to meet their cliche. Now, you say, well, there you go, that's the media for you. But it matters when this happens. Because midway through the Wisconsin struggle, Governor Walker got a phone call from a blogger, a guy named Ian Murphy, who called himself the Buffalo Beast. He called into the governor's office, and this guy, he was going to call in and say that he was Hosni Mubarak, and because he's a guy who punks people, he calls them on the phone and leaves dumb messages and tape records it and stuff. So he's going to call and leave a message with the governor's secretary saying, "It's Hosni Mubarak. Can you give the governor a message? Don't step down. I blinked. I shouldn't have." And so, but when he calls, he says, "Hi, I'm calling for Governor Walker," and the person on the other end of the line goes, "Oh, just a moment," and they start moving him through the food chain. And Ian Murphy, who I interviewed for the book, he says, "I suddenly realized I didn't think I could maintain the Hosni Mubarak thing as well as probably need be." So he's thinking, who can I be? Who can I be? And then he thought, okay, if I get through to the governor, I'm going to pretend to be David Koch, the billionaire campaign donor who's the guy who created ALEC, created the Tea Party movement, pays for all these things. And so he says, yeah, this was David Koch. And they keep moving him up through the ladder. Finally, hi, it's Scott Walker. He's on the phone with the governor of Wisconsin. And the governor spends 20 minutes talking to this guy, saying how, yeah, I'm the next Reagan. And all this stuff. And it really is an amazing document. But in the middle of it, and there's a point to this story, although you may be wondering what it is. And in the middle of the conversation, Ian Murphy, pretending he's David Koch, says, well, how's the media been to you? And Governor Walker says, well, Fox has been great. But you know, some of the other media coverage has been a little bit. It hasn't been everything I'd want it to be. But there was one New York Times article that was really, really good. In fact, it was so good that I had copies photocopied and distributed to every legislator to show them that, in fact, the New York Times, the liberal New York Times, went out and found out that all the private sector workers in Wisconsin, they're on our side. They want to bust the public sector unions too. So that New York Times article, which was wrong, entirely wrong, became an underlying premise of the governor's advocacy for his agenda. It's a big deal. This is one of the challenges that labor has to deal with, because the fact of the matter is those stereotypes, this sense that people don't like teachers, don't like nurses, don't like the people who plow our roads at night, don't like cops, don't like firefighters, don't like anybody who does any service in society, and that sense that the only thing they dislike more than the people who do a service for us is the unions that represent them. That sense is so pervasive in our media today that it becomes definitional even in so-called liberal media. And I saw it writ large as the struggle transitioned into the next stage, final stage of the story that I really make a centerpiece of the book, although we'll talk in questions a little more about that this is totally an ongoing struggle. But about 3 weeks in, the governor became so frustrated that he ordered his legislative allies to break this bill apart. Because remember, it was a fiscal quorum that got the Democrats out and created this space for this movement to grow so very large. And so they declared, amazingly enough, and you people are smarter than me, so you'll understand this, that a bill dealing with collective bargaining, wages, benefits, and pensions was non-economic. And so as a result, they could pass it because it was a non-economic bill. And then they violated the open meetings law. They pushed it through. This is still in the courts to this day. But so they pushed it through, and they passed the bill. And Governor Walker signs it. And the New York Times, the next day, had a front page story that said, anti-labor bill or collective bargaining bill in Wisconsin passes, governor prevails, unions defeated, struggle is over. And the only thing missing actually was you couldn't actually see it, but I think there was a subhead that said, peasants, be off with you, back to your hovels, And it was sort of like, wow, okay, there you go. The New York Times, the newspaper record in America, and all the rest of the media, the national, they're saying, Wisconsin struggle's over. It's all done. Everything's finished. Because in America, when a executive, be it a governor or president, whoever, mayor, if they act, nothing the people do matters, right? Because we are a monarchy. And it's not like we fought a revolution in 1776 to say that, well, hold it, we aren't. But the way the media covers it is it's sort of like whatever the powerful person does, once they act, it's all over. There can be no dissent. And so I thought to myself, wow, what a bummer. Because, I'd actually been enjoying covering this thing and going to these things. But I thought, well, some of my friends from around the state are going to come into Madison on Saturday. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go greet them at least, even though the struggle's over and everything's been, we're defeated and all that. But they were farmers, and they were bringing their tractors in from around the country, around the state. And when I got down south of Madison, it was a snowy, very cold Saturday, and there were dozens of tractors from all over Wisconsin, the farmers who came with them. And if I was really a courageous person, I would have said to the farmers, you guys are wasting your time. I realize the New York Times does not arrive on the farm till a couple days late. But they've declared the struggle over, it's done, everything's finished here. But I just didn't have the guts to do it because there was this one guy who came from Cobb, Wisconsin, out by where my grandparents are from. And he had done his chores from midnight to 3 a.m. and had ridden his tractor 7 hours in the snow into Madison. And how am I going to tell him that he wasted his time, right? That the struggle's over and that this whole solidarity with the workers thing, is out the window. And so I thought, okay, well, what the heck? Let's go with the farmers and let's ride our tractors up to the Capitol and, it'd at least be kind of fun because Whitman, my daughter, had come along and kids love to ride on tractors. So we get on the tractors and my friend Joel Greeno from up in northern Wisconsin, great farm solidarity activist, he says, let's roll. And the farmers, jump on their tractors and they fire them up and they start moving out of that parking lot. And I don't know how many of you know about tractors. they don't move real fast, you know? So it's like, you know, they don't actually have the cinematic power that you would hope, you know? We're sort of like, you know, creeping out of the parking lot on our slow little tractors. And I'm thinking, man, this is such a desultory and disappointing end to this great struggle, you know? But we keep kind of tracking along. We finally get to the first corner like a half hour later. And there are 3 little kids out there with a handmade sign that says, "Thank you, farmers." And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, not only did the New York Times not get to the farm till 2 days late, somebody forgot to tell the kids that the struggle is over. And I was really feeling like a schmuck, because I should have told people, you know, but I didn't really guts to tell the kids, so we kept rolling along, and we come to the next corner, and there's about 100 people out there, and they've got this big handmade banner that they've done. Farmers and workers pulled together, solidarity. And I thought to myself, oh man, I have been waiting all my life, you know, to see the people of the land with the people, you know, who work with their hands and brains, you know, all of the people, you know, from all these divided different places, pulling together in a struggle against corporate and political power, to put the power of the people back and make democracy real. And the struggle's over. You know, we've been defeated. The New York Times has clearly established that we have been defeated. And yet I didn't say anything, so we keep rolling along, and we keep creeping up toward the Capitol. And suddenly I see police lights. And I thought, I am in so much trouble with my wife, because I've taken my kid out, and we're going to get arrested in a farmer protest. But then I had forgotten, this is Wisconsin, where the police are on the side of the unions. They weren't coming to arrest us. They were coming up to block every street up the way to the Capitol so that those tractors could roll on forward. It's not like Oakland. And I'm sorry, sister. You know. Our sheriff announced that the police were not the palace guards serving the governor, that they were, in fact, the representatives of the people. And so the police had come up, they were blocking the roads, and I thought to myself, well, this is even more sad, because, you know, farmers, workers together, now we got the cops on our side. You know, this is like, you know, I've been waiting all my life for this, and we've been defeated. And then it got even uglier because the SUVs pulled up. And if you know anything about rural America, the only group of people who hate farmers more than corporate agribusiness is people with SUVs, because if you ever had to drive behind a tractor, the SUVs do not like it. So the SUVs start pulling up next to us, and the windows go down. I say to my daughter, Whitman, shield your eyes from the one-fingered symbol of disappointment with the people's struggle. But I was wrong. It wasn't one finger coming out of the windows of the SUVs. It was the clenched fist of solidarity, shaped very much like Wisconsin. And I thought, oh my gosh. We didn't just get the cops on our side. We didn't just get the farmers with the workers. We got the SUVs with the tractors. This has never happened before. And Wisconsinites are not the brightest people in the world, I admit that. But after 3 weeks of struggle, we had actually figured out how to beep, "This is what democracy looks like," on our horns. And so the SUVs driving along beside us were going beep, 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 beep. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my heavens. I so should have told the farmers that the struggle was over, because now we've got horns honking and fists in the air and police lights and tractors and workers, and the struggle is over. The New York Times, the paper of record in America, has said it's done, the governor acted, and there's nothing more you can do. Everything is done. Protest means nothing. Demonstrations mean nothing. The struggle is over. And I was starting to really feel a little bummed out. We're still rolling along, police lights flashing, fists in the air, tractors and SUVs, horns honking, beep, 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 beep. And I was thinking, you know, if only something cool would happen now. And then we popped over the curb into the Capitol, horns honking, fists in the air, beep, 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 beep. And there, as we rolled up to that great capital of Wisconsin, we were greeted by 180,000 people who do not read the New York Times. and who did not know that the struggle was over. And it was on that day, that I knew something fundamental. That the struggle in Wisconsin, like the struggle in Ohio, and the struggle in Michigan, struggle in so many other states across this country, and ultimately the struggle that sweeps out across this country. This struggle isn't over. It is not over until we win this fight. This struggle isn't over until the trade union movement prevails in defending its rights and defending the goals of economic and social justice that have always underpinned the trade union movement. And Wisconsin has proven me right, because they have written obituaries on this movement again and again and again. This movement's dead. This movement's over. People can't sustain. They want to go home. They want to watch television. They want to go back to their normal lives. Democratic Party, a lot of the union folks, they were saying, well, what are we going to do? We can't really beat this guy. And yet, there was a website created by a guy, he called the website United Wisconsin. It says, if you want to recall and remove Scott Walker from office, we have to wait a full year to do it. You got to maintain your passion for a full year. But if you do, give me your emails and we'll put them together. 200,000 people gave their emails to the guy who formed United Wisconsin. And he said to himself, I don't know how to build a political movement. I don't know anything about it. So he sent an email out to all 200,000 people. He said, if you think you're a good organizer, if you think you can do something, give me your name, because I'm going to pick by like a dozen people and put them in charge of this and give them the list. I'm not going to give it to the Democratic Party. Not going to give it to anybody who does politics, because this is bigger than that. I'm going to give it to real people of Wisconsin who are ready to run this movement. So he actually interviewed folks, and he picked like a firefighter and a clerk at the university and a small business owner, a bunch of ordinary folks from across Wisconsin, and he made them the United Wisconsin Board. He gave them the 200,000 names, and then he stepped back. He quit. He said, I'm done. You guys are in charge. Make a movement. And they got all sorts of advice. It's undoable. You have to collect 540,000 signatures in a state of 5 million people. And it's 25% of the electorate in the last election. You got to collect 540,000 signatures to recall and remove Scott Walker. It's impossible to do. And on the schedule, you got to do it in the middle of winter at Christmas time and New Year's. It's just, it's not going to happen. But on November 17th, United Wisconsin announced they were going to go out and recall Scott Walker. And damned if they didn't. They went to parking lots. You know that the ugliest day in the entire year is, of course, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, where after the wonderful ingathering of human beings from across the country, finally home with your family, for the first time you've seen them in a year, you say, I'm sorry, I've got to get up at midnight and go to a shopping mall to get, $2 off on an iPad. And made in China by people who suffer a lot. But there in the parking lots of every mall in Wisconsin, there were the United Wisconsin Volunteers. They trained 30,000 volunteers to go out and get signatures. They were out, and when my daughter and I went to run the Turkey Trot in Burlington, which is like a 4-mile run, there were dozens of United Wisconsin volunteers along the route, running along, trying to get the petition signatures. And they even went out like on the day after Christmas when everybody returns gifts. In fact, there were reports there were even people out on Christmas and New Year's. In fact, it is well understood in Wisconsin that many marriages and family relationships were saved by the words, honey, I'm going to go out and collect some petition signatures. and this movement just kept on growing and building. And on January 17th of this year, just about a month ago, a couple days ago, a truck pulled up in front of the Government Accountability Board in Madison. And it popped open the back of this big truck. And they had all the firefighters, bagpipers arrayed along the side, and uniformed cops and all sorts of public servants. And they created a corridor, up the street going from where the truck parked to the Government Accountability Board, which is our state elections board. People from counties across Wisconsin grabbed boxes from that truck and started running along the route to the Government Accountability Board. 1 box, 2 boxes, 10 boxes, 20 boxes, 100 boxes, 1,000 boxes, 3,000 boxes, 5,000 boxes. When they finally counted all the petitions and all the signatures, United Wisconsin had not gotten the 540,000 signatures they set out to get. They had collected 1.2 million signatures to recall and remove Scott Walker from office. And they had gathered another 850,000 signatures to recall his lieutenant governor and another 100,000 signatures to recall the Republican leaders of the legislature. The largest single mobilization of citizens demanding the recall and removal of their elected officials in the history of the United States. And I'll close off with just one little bit of a story about a woman named Lori Compass. Lori Compass is a wedding photographer, and she's about this tall, and sweet, wonderful person, lives in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. And Lori Compass had never been involved in politics in her life. She jokes that she didn't really know the difference between Democrat and Republican until this struggle began. But she was so offended by the assault on labor rights and by what her state senator, the majority leader of the Wisconsin State Senate, Scott Fitzgerald, had done, that she said Scott Fitzgerald needs to be recalled and removed, along with the governor and along with the lieutenant governor and these other folks. And the Democratic Party leaders in Wisconsin said, you know, this is the most Republican district in the state. You can't, it just won't work. It will not work to try and, you won't possibly be able to get the signatures there. Even United Wisconsin, the great mobilization, said that district, that's crazy talk. You know, that's just too much. It cannot be done. So Lori Compass sat down at her table and created a Facebook site. And she said, if you want to recall State Senator Scott Fitzgerald, the most powerful Republican legislator in Wisconsin, will you help me out? And she started going out, standing in front of a store all alone, this little wedding photographer. And she then got some friends to do it, and they moved out across this district. And on the day that they filed 1 million signatures, more than 1 million signatures to recall the governor, all these other signatures, another truck pulled up, and there was Lori Compass with all the people she had mobilized in the most Republican district of the state. And Lori Compass marched with dozens of other people carrying boxes, and they filed 21,000 signatures to recall the most powerful Republican in the state, representing the most Republican district in the state. And if the reports are right, when I get back to Wisconsin after having spent time with members of a union that made so much of this struggle possible, Lori Compass will announce that she is going to challenge Scott Fitzgerald and be the candidate to replace him in the state legislature. Brothers and sisters, I could tell you 1,000 stories, and I could take it off to Ohio and to other places around this country. Something real is happening. Something real is happening in America. You are members of a union that has believed more passionately, more intensely than any other union that it is possible in this country that we could have a mobilization that would push back against all the corporate power, against all the cuts, against all the assaults on our rights. It's happening. It's real, and it's breaking out across this country. Your challenge, my challenge, all of our challenges is to believe. To believe that if we fight this fight, and we fight it with everything that we've got, we have the ability to put aside the dialogue about austerity and to open up that dialogue about accountability. And then we have the ability to push aside those words and replace them with the words that should be at the center of all of our dialogues about labor and economics and politics itself and democracy itself. And that is the ultimate goal of an empowered people and an empowered labor movement, which is social and economic justice. The great philosopher, anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss always said, he would be asked, said, you're the historian of civilizations, you know what the greatest civilizations in history, what was the golden age? Or if you can't tell us when the golden age of the past was, tell us what the parameters are, what are the measures of a golden age? And Claude Levi-Strauss always said, that is the most disempowering question you could possibly ask. Because if you ask me, when was the golden age? That means that it's behind us. If you say, what are the measures of a golden age? It means it's ahead of us. I don't believe either of those things. I think the golden age is in us. I think the golden age is right now. Every mistake that has been made in the past can be undone. Every dream that we have dreamed can be made real. The only thing we have to do is to stop looking behind us and stop looking ahead of us and to realize The fight is right now. We are in the middle of it, and if we win it now, this is the golden age. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the golden age of labor. Let's make it real. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I am so honored to be with you. Solidarity! 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 Thank you.